structure.
Well, should we get to the groupishness?
Yes,
because they're very. I like the term groupish because it is true. It doesn't sound like
it's value free.
Yeah. It is value free, and it's not derogatory or anything like that. So this is like chapter 9.
Yeah, and he talks in this about how it was that we've just evolved to be this way through pure selection. If you're going to be existing in a group, the people who are better at working with a group will have been more likely to succeed.
Before we go on, though, I've got a great... I remember this very clearly from when I first read it. This is a great quote. In the terrible days after the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001, I felt an urge so primitive I was embarrassed to admit it to my friends, obviously fellow liberals. I wanted to put an American flag decal on my car.
Boom.
Why would that be weird? That would only be weird to those people who are in the sort of extreme liberal mold of Rousseau, where it's like, no, I'm a man who exists outside of a time and a place. I'm a self-contained universe, a self-generative universe that owes nothing to anyone. And so to give a pledge of fealty and group adherence and loyalty to another group is a betrayal of that notion of like liberal individualism, like the atomized individual. And so you are essentially a traitor to liberalism if you commit to the national group. And so obviously Haidt is just like, well, I'm an American, I'm not just like, I'm not a self-generated year zero, new man. I'm a person who's on a continuum. I'm a part of a time and a place. I'm a part of a civilization.
I can recognize and respect the virtues that my culture represents.
Yeah, exactly. And so on a moral and instinctive level, outside of the rational liberal individualism, he is a part of a continuum. He's on the Burkean continuum of civilization, and he sees himself like that. And I found that very interesting, that bit.
It is very interesting, and amusingly, I think he resolved it by putting on some kind of compromise bumper sticker.
I think he did, yeah. But it's just like, he was like, I was a professor, and professors don't do such things. Flag waving and nationalism are for conservatives. It's like, wow, you're not such a liberal, are you, Jonathan?
Yeah, he definitely seems like he's really struggling throughout some parts of this book to maintain his liberal nature. Although he does say near the end that he began, after going through all of this research, to read a lot of conservative literature. I think he maybe mentions reading F.A. Haidt. He read Burke. I think he might have even read some Scruton and some Thomas Sowell. And he said that he actually really respects and appreciates the conservative literature, and he appreciates their worldview and has quite a deep love for it. He just doesn't like the Republican Party.
Sure, I mean that's you're not obliged to like the Republican Party.
Yeah, of course. I think now I was reading some interviews with him in preparation for this. Nowadays, he describes himself as a Democrat voting centrist, although I'd say if you're still voting Democrat, you're not living up to the centrist part. I imagine that it's something that he's developed from habit.
And not only that, peer pressure as well.
Yes.
If all the people around him learned that he wasn't voting for the Democrats, he'd probably be in trouble.
But there's another fantastic point in here where he's talking about the way that people make decisions with one, and what they actually are thinking about when they're making decisions, and how, because of the fact that we're so groupish, where most people think to themselves, oh, other people consider decisions that they're making purely on the how does this benefit me? What's actually happening is most of the time people are thinking, how does this benefit my group?
And you see the sort of collective wisdom in voting as well, actually, where like if you, I can't remember if it's Haidt or someone else, but there's an example of like the sort of wisdom of crowds, where if you get a group of people together and get them to like vote on certain issues or raise their hand to say whether they agree or disagree, like you'll get a weird sort of, and it is a genuine sort of wisdom where certain people will start disagreeing and like pulling the crowd in a different direction to kind of moderate and balance out what you get. It's really interesting. I'll have to find it.
Yeah, you'll have to find that, because that does sound interesting. But he does, like I say, he talks about how we've evolved to be this way to such the point that chapter 10 is called The Hive Switch.
Yes. Which
is entirely dedicated to talking about a mechanism that he describes as the Hive Switch.
Complete with Macedonian phalanx.
Yes, to show how it works. And it's very fascinating how the way the brain works influences a lot of this. Like, we have these things called mirror neurons, which he says people feel each other's pain and joy to a much greater degree than any other primates. Just seeing somebody else smile activates some of the same neurons in your brain as when you smile. So the other person is effectively smiling in your brain, which makes you happy and more likely to smile. Which
smiling in your brain, I like that.
I know, it sounds so lovely, doesn't
it? Does,
It sounds really nice. Yeah. And research also shows that strangers will spontaneously organize themselves into leaders and followers when something like a natural disaster will strike. People are happy to follow when they see that their group needs to get something done, and when the person who emerges as the leader doesn't activate their hypersensitive oppression detectors, because of course, if somebody's positioning themselves at the top, there could be a threat that they're going to try and screw you over. So you need to sort of balance that out. But if they're not activating that, a leader must construct a moral matrix based in the same way on the authority foundation to legitimize their authority, the liberty foundation to make sure that subordinates don't feel oppressed and don't want to band together to oppose a bullying alpha male, and above all, the loyalty foundation, which he describes as a response to the challenge of forming cohesive coalitions. But the fact that people will just spontaneously organize like that is fascinating, and once again, it's just completely destroying a lot of assumptions that most people have nowadays. And in fact,
must be intrinsic, right?
Well, there's something in your brain, oxytocin he describes it as, and he describes a study here describing it. Dutch men played a variety of economic games while sitting alone in cubicles, linked via computers in small teams. Half of the men had been given a nasal spray of oxytocin and half got a placebo spray. The men who received oxytocin made less selfish decisions, they cared more about helping their group, but they showed no concern at all for improving the outcome of men in other groups. In one of those studies, oxytocin made men more willing to hurt other teams in a prisoner's dilemma game because doing so was the best way to protect their own group.
So what you're saying is when they're all in the Macedonian phalanx, the oxytocin is flowing fast and free.
Yes, fast and furious.
Crushing the Persians. Makes me far more willing to destroy them.
You join them arm in arm in brotherhood, just enjoying the glory of the battle. And interestingly enough, he's
got a quote here. Oxytocin simply makes people love their in-group more.
Yeah, because he says that they did some follow-up studies to try and find whether oxytocin would make you hate the out-group more. And it wasn't that. They just make you love your in-group more, which is kind of beautiful. Obviously, obviously can lead to them hurting other groups more, but only in defense, really.
The out-group needs to sit down and watch itself, doesn't it?
It does. They need to take care. But once again, this is all just reinforcing to me the absolute absurdity of, I mean, as we're recording this, we got all of the census data today, just importing all of these foreigners into here. One, we're literally not even biologically programmed to want to welcome them as much in the first place, unless you're a leftist, in which case your loyalty just makes you hate the in-group so much that you'll just accept them out of spite.
You've been brainwashed into hating your own friends and family.
Yes. And also, just their culture is particular to them. Our culture is particular to us. You can't just import these people. And like we say, they're not just an atomized individual. They bring everything along with them. And all of this just reinforces that.
Yeah, they didn't just spring out of nothing. They are not a new man. They are people with existing histories.
Yeah, and this goes back to Durkheim as well, who is not somebody that I've read, but somebody I'm interested in reading now after reading this, because he says that Durkheim had a very socially conservative way of viewing society. And he says that Durkheim noted this, that the second, he quotes Durkheim, there's the ability to experience another set of emotions outside of just yourself, where he describes the second are those which bind me to the social entity as a whole. These manifest themselves primarily in the relationships of the society. With other societies, which could be called intersocial, the first set of emotions leaves my autonomy and personality almost intact. No doubt they tie me to others, but without taking much of my independence from me. When I act under the influence of the second, by contrast, I am simply part of a whole, whose actions I follow and whose influence I am subject to. Which is exactly like you're discussing. I think anybody can understand how this feels. Like, I've been to plenty of gigs over the years. Yep. You go to a gig, you're in a crowd. All it takes is the lead vocalist or whoever's on stage to get everybody to start chanting, and you'll suddenly feel like you're transcending yourself. You're part of that great whole. That's why people love going to gigs and love going to festivals, because they can feel like they're part of a wider community.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we're kind of coming to the end. So the last thing I want to discuss was the elephant and the rider. So I think we skipped over that.
We did a bit. That's his famous analogy that he brings, which is that human rationality and human reason acts as an elephant and a rider, with the elephant being the emotional gut response and the rider being your reason. And oftentimes it's basically impossible for the rider, your reason, to be the sole director of where the elephant's going. Because, as you can probably tell from the analogy, elephants are massive, they're rampaging, and they can get out of control very easily.
More importantly, the elephant is only in control of the rider as long as it chooses to be, consents to be. Right?
That's true.
The rider actually has no power of compulsion over the elephant. That's the point of the analogy. And so if the elephant is, it has decided, or, is stimulated, impulsed to doing something, then the rider actually has no real way of controlling it until the elephant has calmed down. And so that's which I think is this goes back to Hume, like we were saying before we started, actually, that he's been saying since like 1640, the reason is the servant of the passions,
and that's how it should be as well.
Yes, actually, yeah. The intuition, the instinct, it drives, and the rider is trying to essentially steer it around to where it wants to go. And if I recall correctly, Haidt says that, look, basically this is why it's so difficult to change someone's mind, because when you start attacking the worldview, well, the elephant starts rearing up, and the rider's got to be, oh God, now I've got to justify why this elephant is out of control.
Yeah, so he actually describes, if you want to change somebody's mind, the best thing to do is appeal purely to their emotional response first, and get them going emotionally, and then try and formulate the reason for it afterwards. Which is why he says there's an entire chapter just called The Conservative Advantage, where he talks about, purely because of the fact that conservatives operate among all 6 moral foundations, they're much better positioned to be able to convince people because they can appeal to it, whereas liberals can only go for care and harm, where most people, or at least most conservatives, aren't going to be convinced by it. Most moderates are potentially not going to be as open to it, whereas conservatives are able to appeal to every single one of them. It makes it more easy to convince people.
But it also explains why the conservatives have to be censored from the left-wing point of view.
It does.
It's like, well, look, we're not going to out-persuade people because we've only got 2 or 3 foundations on which to persuade. The conservatives can persuade from all 6, then they are at a disadvantage. And just to go back to the elephant and the rider thing. So essentially, as I understood it, he was like, look, you have to make sure that a person can rationally change their mind, but you have to make sure that they are extremely calm, feel very safe.
Yes.
The elephant is essentially asleep, and then you have to gently explain to the rider, and make it very, very unusual.
Says, if you're trying to change your mind, he says, what you should basically do is sense where the elephant is going and let the rider just go with it.
Yeah.
Just go with it, because otherwise you're not going to get anything done, and you're just going to probably frustrate yourself.
Yeah.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.